Greetings, everybody. Um, I came across an email. Somebody sent me an email earlier today, and I honestly never heard of the testimony of this individual of a father of a loved one he lost at the Columbine shooter. Honestly, I never heard of this, and when I read the email, I was really moved by it. And there's a lot of lessons we can learn from this. So I dug up some more stuff on it, and this is basically Columbine shooter's father 12 years later is what I'm titling this video. And there's a lot of lessons to be learned here, not just because of the shooting, but because of what's going on in our country, our culture, and in our world, and even in the Christian circles. This is just very, very telling. I'm going to read you the article, and then I'm going to play a video from Daryl Scott, the father of Rachel Scott, who was the first person killed in the Columbine shooting. And, really soak this in. I think there's a lot we can learn from this. From the Inquisitor, Columbine father Daryl Scott echoes sentiments over Sandy Hook shootings. The Sandy Hook Elementary School shooting recalls the famous quote by George Santayana, quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." This philosophy was a slight modification of a statement made by Edmund Burke, quote, "Those who don't know history are destined to repeat it." If we heed these words, we might look to past school shootings like the Columbine massacre. Daryl Scott is the father of Rachel Scott, the first person to die in Columbine at the hands of the two estranged youths. Some of his thoughts have begun to become popular again through emails and Facebook. As previously reported by the Inquisitor, Rachel's brother Scott was a survivor of the Columbine massacre. He believes that the nation's focus should be on how schools teach character, integrity, and values, not just academic achievements. So far, events seem to indicate that history will be repeating in the wake of the Sandy Hook school shooting. Rupert Murdoch has called for gun bans, and even moderates are questioning whether we need gun control reform. Some bloggers are even calling for the death of the NRA president and suspending the Second Amendment. After Columbine, there was a similar reaction, and a Congressional House subcommittee was formed to consider the question of further gun control laws. Daryl Scott gave his testimony, laying out his thoughts on the subject of gun control and how it pertained to the tragedy he had just experienced. And I'll read the full testimony after the article is after I'm done reading the article. They quote part of it, and then it continues. This sentiment echoes another idea that is being publicized all over the media, that since God and prayer is not officially endorsed by the government-funded public school system, a corresponding gap in teaching spiritual or moral strength may inevitably lead to human choices that cause such tragedies. Mike Huckabee has been criticized for saying we've escorted God right out of our culture and marched him off the public square. And then we express our surprise that a culture without him actually reflects what it has become. End quote. AFA President Brian Fisher's thoughts on the subject were a bit more crass, claiming that God did not intervene in the tragedy because, quote, God is not going to go where he is not wanted. Some decry these statements as being a politicization of what should be a time of mourning. Daryl Scott had some strong words to say on that subject, although he does not say God allowed this to happen, but instead puts the emphasis on human decisions. And I'll go ahead and read this portion of the testimony here. Actually, no, I'll read it here in just a minute. So, at the end of the article, he goes, "Do you think that the words of this Columbine father should guide our thoughts in considering how to prevent future school shootings?" And here is the testimony. Testimony of Darrell Scott, father of 2 victims of Columbine High School shootings, Littleton, Colorado. Before the Subcommittee on Crime, House Judiciary Committee, United States House of Representatives. He actually was invited to speak there, and to much of the Congress and politicians' surprise, he had this to say, basically. Since the dawn of creation, there has been both good and evil in the heart of men and women. We all contain the seeds of kindness or the seeds of violence. The death of my wonderful daughter, Rachel Joy Scott, and the deaths of that heroic teacher and the other 11 children who died must not be in vain. Their blood cries out for answers. The first recorded act of violence was when Cain slew his brother Abel out in the field. The villain was not the club he used, neither was it the NCA, the National Club Association. The true killer was Cain, and the reason for the murder could only be found in Cain's heart. In the days that followed the Columbine tragedy, I was amazed at how quickly fingers began to be pointed at groups such as the NRA. I am not a member of the NRA. I am not a hunter. I do not even own a gun. I am not here to represent or defend the NRA because I don't believe that they are responsible for my daughter's death. Therefore, I do not believe that they need to be defended. If I believed they had anything to do with Rachel's murder, I would be their strongest opponent. I am here today to declare that Columbine was not just a tragedy. It was a spiritual event that should be forcing us to look at where the real blame lies. Much of that blame lies here in this room. Remember, he's speaking at Congress back in 1999, after the Columbine shooting. Much of that blame lies behind the pointing fingers of the accusers themselves. I wrote a poem just 4 nights ago that expressed my feelings best. This was written way before I knew I would be speaking here today. Your laws ignore our deepest needs. Your words are empty air. You stripped away our heritage. You've outlawed simple prayer. Now gunshots fill our classrooms and precious children die. You seek for answers everywhere and ask the question, why? You regulate restrictive laws through legislative creed, and yet you fail to understand that God is what we need. And he goes on to say, and he continues, men and women are 3-part beings. We all consist of body, soul, and spirit. When we refuse to acknowledge a third part of our makeup, we create a void that allows evil, prejudice, and hatred to rush in and wreak havoc. Spiritual influences were present within our educational systems for most of our nation's history. Many of our major colleges began as theological seminaries. This is a historic fact. What has happened to us as a nation? We have refused to honor God, and in doing so, we open the doors to hatred and violence. And when something as terrible as Columbine's tragedy occurs, or Sandy Hook, politicians immediately look for a scapegoat, such as the NRA. They immediately seek to pass more restrictive laws that continue to erode away our personal and private liberties. We do not need more restrictive laws. Eric and Dylan would not have been stopped by metal detectors. No amount of gun laws can stop someone who spends months planning this type of massacre. The real villain lies within our own hearts. Political posturing and restrictive legislation are not the answers. The young people of our nation hold the key. There is a spiritual awakening taking place that will not be squelched. We do not need more religion. We do not need more gaudy television evangelists spewing out verbal religious garbage. We do not need more $1-million church buildings built while people with basic needs are being ignored. We do need a change of heart and a humble acknowledgement that this nation was founded on the principle of simple trust in God. As my son Craig lay under that table in the school library and saw his 2 friends murdered before his very eyes, he did not hesitate to pray in school. I defy any law or politician to deny him that right. I challenge every young person in America and around the world to realize that on April 20th, 1999, at Columbine High School, prayer was brought back to our schools. Do not let the many prayers offered by those students be in vain. Dare to move into the new millennium with a sacred disregard for legislation that violates your conscience and denies your God-given right to communicate with them. To those of you who would point your finger at the NRA or GOA, Gun Owners of America, I give to you a sincere challenge. Dare to examine your own heart before you cast the first stone. My daughter's death will not be in vain. The young people of this country will not allow that to happen. So, so that's basically it. And he's spot on. I mean, this is I don't know how he could say it any better. And you know, it's we can learn a lot from that. We can learn a lot from this individual. And I'm going to play the video now. And so I want to thank you for watching. And truth be told, truth be known, stay safe. God bless. And we will see you next time. Bye-bye.
Well, my daughter Rachel was the first one to be shot and killed in the tragedy at Columbine High School, April 20th, 1999. And that morning I had gone to a store, and my cell phone rang at about 11:40, and my wife said that there had been a shooting. A neighbor had run across and told her there had been a shooting at the school. And so I rushed out, got in my car, started across town, got caught up in a massive traffic jam, and turned on the radio. And I wasn't expecting to hear what I heard. I was thinking probably a kid took a gun to school and shot at a teacher or someone he was mad at, and wasn't even expecting to hear an announcer sobbing, saying that 35 or so kids had been shot and that a number of them had been killed. And immediately I was thinking of my daughter Rachel and my son Craig, who were both students there. My brother had 2 children there as well. And so I started hyperventilating. I mean, I started praying and crying, and just felt like I was going to have a heart attack when I heard that news, and rushed across town. We waited in an elementary school for hours as busloads of young people came from the school, and they marched them across the stage, and they called out their names, and slowly the crowd dwindled down until there was just a handful of people left, and they told us there was one bus left coming from Columbine. And I remember running outside, balancing on a small fence, looking in the bus windows when it pulled up. And when the final students got off the bus, there were still 13 families that had loved ones that were unaccounted for, a teacher and 12 students. That day was the most horrible day of my life. And I think the hard part was not knowing whether Rachel was dead or alive. We had heard from my son Craig. We had heard from Jeff and Sarah, my nephew and niece. But by midnight that night, we assumed that Rachel was one of the ones killed. We'd called every hospital, and our only hope was that she was unconscious and that perhaps she had been shot and wounded and hid in a closet somewhere that no one had looked in. That was our only hope. And at noon the next day, we got the official word that she was the first one to be shot and killed at Columbine. And then my son, Craig, had gone through incredible trauma. He was in the library, and his 2 close friends who were both on the football team, Craig was on the wrestling team, the 3 of them were sitting at a table talking in the library, and 2 boys ran into the room with guns and began to kill students all around Craig. Cassie Bernal was killed 10 feet behind my son. Val Shanor, a young girl that was also asked if she believed in God, was shot, I think, 8 times and survived. And they came to the table where Craig was at and began to taunt one of my son's best friends, who was a black student, with racial slurs. And they shot and killed Isaiah. They shot Matthew Kechter. And Craig was literally covered with the blood of his own friends. They turned their guns on him, and at that point the sprinkler system went off in the library from smoke in the room. And it distracted the boys, and they never came back to where Craig was at, or I would have lost 2 children that day. One of the things we discovered after Rachel died, I was in her bedroom with my daughter Bethany and we were looking at some of Rachel's things. We were talking about her, and I happened to see two pieces of paper caught on the mattress springs under Rachel's bed, and I pulled them out, and it was an essay that she had written for her fifth period class a month before she died, and it was called My Ethics, My Codes of Life. And in that essay, Rachel challenged her reader to start a chain reaction with kindness and compassion, and she repeated that several times. But she defined compassion. She gave Webster's definition of compassion, and then she improved on his. She said, here's my definition. And she listed 5 things that to her meant compassion. And the first thing she listed was forgiveness. And that really struck our family, that Rachel put such a high emphasis on forgiveness. And I remember shortly after the tragedy, we were out at Rachel's car, which became a big memorial next to the school. There were several memorial sites that were built, and around her car they put thousands of flowers and books and all these things. And I remember Maria Shriver doing an interview. Arnold Schwarzenegger's wife did an interview with us, and she said to me, she said, how do you feel about the boys who did this and their parents? And I said, well, our family talked about all this, and we made a choice to forgive and to move on and celebrate Rachel's life. And I saw her head just jerk back. Later, after the interview, she came up to me and said, someday I'd like to talk to you more about that. She said, I couldn't forgive anyone who had done what they did to your daughter. And I've said then, and I say now, that I would not have pardoned Eric and Dylan, but I forgave them. My daughter would not have wanted Eric and Dylan to ruin our lives because of unforgiveness. In fact, she was the one that told us to forgive. With our family, as we chose to forgive, my son Craig, who was in the library, had the hardest struggle with that issue. And he was very angry, and rightly so. I mean, he had every reason to be angry. His sister was killed. He watched his 2 close friends killed beside him. He was terrorized. I mean, I can't imagine what Craig went through facing these 2 boys, looking down the barrel of their guns, and came as close as anybody I've ever met to dying. And so he struggled with that issue. And forgiveness is something that sometimes we need to do over and over again until it takes, until the grace of God is firmly there for us to let go. And I'm so glad that Craig has. Craig is truly forgiven and moved ahead with his life and chose to celebrate Rachel's life instead of the anger and the bitterness that we see with so many other people. For me personally, there's no way I could have, in my own strength, forgiven Eric and Dylan. I would have been mad at them for the rest of my life. But I didn't feel anger at first. My deepest reaction was just incredible sorrow. I just was so devastated by Rachel's death, because I have 5 children, and we called her a spark plug, because she was the spark plug of our family. And it was like they took the light out of our family. I know that people who are not Christians go through tragedies similar to what I've gone through, and I don't know how I could have gone through all of this and kept my sanity, because we not only lost a daughter, we had a son that we had to deal with for a full year after the tragedy, who had nightmares night after night, would wake up screaming, would relive the tragedy, would go into fits of rage because of his emotions would just get the best of him, struggled to keep his sanity for a year. I can't imagine what it's like to not be a Christian and go through what we went through. I just can't even imagine it. I was in an interview with a national person, a person you see every day on television. I won't name her, but we were doing an interview, and a commercial break came, and she leaned over and tapped me on the leg, and she said, "Mr. Scott, you're a very strong person." And I said, "No, I'm not a strong person. I'm a very weak person, and I choose that weakness because I've learned a secret that Rachel learned too, that God's grace is there when we choose to be weak. And so, yes, I'm strong, but it's in the strength of His grace, not in my own strength." This is, to me, so important, is you need to acknowledge that you can't forgive within your own strength. That's the first step of forgiveness. And I had to say that, God, I cannot forgive Eric and Dylan. And I confess that weakness. But out of my weakness, your strength is made perfect. And when we choose to be weak, God is strong. But there's so much that opened up as a result of forgiveness, you know.